My name is Wendy Schumer, an ordinary 31-year-old woman immersed in the monotonous routine of law practice. Outwardly, my life seems unremarkable, but deep inside there is a story that I have been trying to forget for a long time. The only unusual thing in my life is the shadow of my sister Katie, who always accompanies me. After graduating from high school, I devoted myself to studying law, hoping that hard work and knowledge would become my path to recognition. My sister Katie, 3 years younger than me, has always been the opposite of me. She is charming, sociable, and able to win the heart of anyone she meets with just one smile. Our family has always treated her with special warmth, leaving me aside like a shadow against her radiance. I've never been blessed with her natural charm. My attempts to attract the attention of my parents ended unsuccessfully. They looked at me with coldness and indifference, and I hardly felt any affection. Instead, I received harsh looks and critical comments. I tried my best, studied hard, striving to reach the heights in my studies. Each of my grades was the result of nights without sleep and continuous work. I hoped that my successes would one day bring me the praise and love of my family. However, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't outshine Katie. She received all the love and admiration of our parents, while my achievements went unnoticed. Eventually, exhausted by the constant attempts to earn their recognition, I decided to focus on myself and find my value in knowledge and career. I promised myself that I would become a successful lawyer and prove that I was worthy of respect. My efforts bore fruit. I became one of the best at the university, and my career began to develop rapidly. But even then, my parents continued to criticize me. "It's not enough to be just good," they said. "You need to be perfect in everything." Even when I got 98 out of 100 points, they noted the missing 2, not the successes I had achieved. Katie's wedding day has arrived. She looked dazzling in a luxurious wedding dress that accentuated her beauty and grace. The hall was filled with guests, the sounds of music and laughter mingled in a festive atmosphere. I stood aside, watching the celebration, feeling the familiar feeling of invisibility. When Katie came up to the microphone to give a speech, she looked at me with the same smug smile that I had known since childhood. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "today is a special day not only for me, but also for my family. But there is one thing I would like to discuss with you." The room was silent, all eyes were on her. "My sister Wendy," Katie continued, "is here today, and I was wondering if someone would like to take her out of our hands." My heart stopped beating. She continued, "She's not very sociable and, as you can see, she's getting old. But perhaps some of you will be interested." Her words cut me like a sharp knife. Tension hung in the hall. The guests began to whisper. Some looked at Katie with surprise and condemnation. But Katie didn't seem to notice. She grabbed the microphone again. "Come on, sister, you need to sell yourself more. There are many beautiful doctors here." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. Mixed feelings of resentment and humiliation overwhelmed me. I couldn't believe she was saying this in front of everyone. At that moment, something unexpected happened. The exam I took recently was really difficult. I put as much time into the preparation as I could afford, and yet my results did not meet expectations. I stood in front of my mother, her eyes shining with cold severity. Her voice sounded sharp, like the blow of a glass knife. "Are you going to flaunt these imperfect grades?" I felt my heart constrict in my chest, and all I could squeeze out was a quiet, "I'm really sorry." But I knew it wouldn't help. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how many hours I devoted to my studies, my success was never enough for her and my father. Any score below perfection, even 98%, even 99%, was a reason for criticism for them. However, what hurt me most was not the icy remarks of my parents, but the words that Katie uttered with feigned lightness, as if she did not understand how much they cut. She often came into my room without knocking, looked at my papers and, seeing good grades, said, "Oh, sister, she didn't make it again, did she?" You will be scolded again." She was grinning, her voice was full of hidden mockery, and I could feel a wave of bitterness rising inside me. "Did you come here just to say that?" That day, I tried not to show resentment, although everything was boiling inside. Katie shrugged her shoulders with feigned concern. "Well, I was worried you might lose heart again. I just wanted to check on you." "If you were really worried," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was racing, "you wouldn't say such things." She looked at me with cold contempt. Her gaze was as icy as her mother's words a few minutes ago. "You see," Katie said with a slight wave of her hand, "that's your problem. You're always like this. That's why Mom and Dad don't show you love." Those words hurt inside me, like a sharp prick. Katie stood there for a second longer, her cold gaze burning through me, and then she walked out as if nothing had happened. As soon as her footsteps faded in the hallway, I heard her cheerful laughter coming from the living room, where, as always, she was sitting with her parents, laughing at something, probably at my expense. I should have gotten used to it by now, but a feeling of bitterness washed over me. Tears started streaming down my cheeks. How many times have I told myself that I don't need their approval, that I have to be stronger? But Katie's words, like poison, penetrated deeply, destroying my composure. I clutched the report card in my hand, and the paper crumpled from the strength of my grip. I was sitting alone in my room, overcome with sadness and loneliness, but gradually a spark of determination lit up inside me. I decided again that I had to break out of this suffocating environment. My abilities, my studies, it was my only chance of salvation. I decided that I would try even harder. I'll get better, I'll get my way. With this thought in mind, I plunged into textbooks with even more passion, closing myself off from the world and resentments. But one day, when I was sitting in class and the wind from the street gently penetrated through the windows, an unexpected announcement from my father came to the class. "Wendy, you're not going to high school," he said coldly. "You should start looking for a job." I froze, not understanding what I had heard. My hand holding the pen froze, and my heart seemed to stop. "But why?" I barely managed to say, not believing my ears. "Your results are not enough to justify our spending on you," my father continued. We discussed this with my mother and decided that we would focus our finances on Katie. "We can't afford to spend more on your education." His words, cold and merciless, seemed to deprive the world of colors. Everything went dark, as if someone had turned off the light. Mom and Katie looked at me with undisguised smiles, enjoying my suffering. I tried to object, but my father stopped all my attempts. The decision was final. Since then, despite my efforts, my desire to learn has faded like a fire filled with water. The praise of my home teacher, who always admired my grades, gradually lost its meaning for me. I felt that his words did not fill the void left by the family's lack of interest in my education. The house no longer seemed to me a place where I could hope for understanding or support, and this feeling strengthened my desire to break out, to escape from suffocating walls poisoned by indifference and expectations that, no matter how hard I tried, I could never justify. My life has started to change since I graduated from high school and got a job at a local factory. I was only 16 years old, and being not old enough to live alone, I continued to stay in a house that had long been a stranger to me. I worked as hard as I could every day, putting all my strength into work, but my salary went almost entirely to the needs of my family. I saved only small amounts, dreaming that one day I would save enough to leave this house forever. During those difficult days, it felt like I was crawling through an endless tunnel, without the slightest glimmer of light ahead. However, everything changed on my 19th birthday. I wrote a short letter to my family saying goodbye to them and left. This day became a starting point for me. I left a place that is now only a memory. My family's reaction was as cold as their attitude towards me all these years. Complete silence, not a single phone call, not a single line in response. At first, loneliness weighed painfully on me, clouding my every day, but gradually I learned to cope with this silence. Work helped to distract me, and over time, loneliness became less acute, replaced by a feeling of inner peace that I had never experienced while living with a family. This newfound peace ignited something new in me, an old but long-forgotten passion for knowledge. I once again felt the joy of learning, which was once my only consolation. I started learning again, step by step, starting from the very basics. Every evening I devoted myself to reading textbooks, at first simple school textbooks, and then moved on to more complex ones. My attention was attracted by books on law. They opened up a new, vast world to me, and I realized that this area arouses my genuine interest. Despite the fact that I had only a secondary education, I learned about the system of preliminary exams, which allowed me to take the bar exam without a university degree. This discovery turned my life upside down. Now my every day was saturated with the desire to study. At work, during short breaks and lunches, I memorized legal terms and repeated the laws. People around me noticed my determination, and some of my senior colleagues even began to support me, seeing my diligence. I was 24 years old when I finally passed the bar exam. This moment was the culmination of all my efforts for me. I left my job at the factory, the same job that had accompanied me since my youth, and got a job at one of the leading law firms. After about 5 years of continuous training and professional growth, I plucked up the courage and opened my own law practice. I was proud that I had achieved this on my own. Now I work as a legal advisor at a hospital and I feel confident and independent. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had told my parents about what I had achieved. Would I finally be able to meet their expectations? Would you have heard those praises that you always craved as a child? But I didn't tell them anything. My life has been different for a long time, and I realized that I was not looking for unexpected meetings with my family. However, such a meeting happened earlier than I expected. One evening after work, I found a message on my phone. It was from my younger sister Katie. She was getting married. I involuntarily whispered to myself, "Katie is getting married." Now she was 29 and engaged to a doctor. The wedding was supposed to take place in a month. Katie and my parents, oddly enough, invited me. Despite the years of estrangement, I couldn't ignore this event. In response to her message, I said that I would come. Katie quickly replied, specifying the date and place of the ceremony, adding a message at the end that made me chuckle. "Don't forget about the wedding present." Obviously, she was more interested in the gift than our communication itself. I decided to use the wedding as an opportunity to finally put an end to my relationship with my family, reunite at least for this day, and then leave again, leaving the past behind. Katie's wedding day promised to be emotionally difficult, but I hoped to spend it with restraint and dignity. I chose a simple but elegant blue dress for this occasion, which emphasized my sense of self-worth and independence. When I entered the hall where the ceremony was taking place, I had to go through a series of mandatory formalities. I carefully took my place in the family area, where my parents were already sitting. As soon as I approached them, their icy words pierced me like a knife. My father said coldly, "You're right," he said to his mother, as if I were standing somewhere far away and not next to them. "Inviting someone like her is a disgrace to our family. We didn't get any benefit from her as parents." My mother supported him, adding with disdain, "Katie shouldn't have called her." They didn't even pause to look at me, as if I were invisible. This conversation continued without any hesitation, even despite my presence. I tried not to show how much it hurt me to hear those words, trying to keep my composure. The reality of this moment was all too clear. My parents, as before, continued to ignore my existence, as if I were just an inconvenient shadow in their lives. Silently looking around the room, I noticed several familiar faces from the groom's side. One of them evoked a vague feeling of déjà vu in my memory, although I could not immediately remember where I had seen this man. Curiosity began to torment me, and I briefly drifted away, remembering the smallest details, until finally I remembered. I have seen this face in the past, in the context of a completely different life. After learning the groom's name, I realized that my guesses were correct. This strange coincidence seemed almost ironic. But instead of letting surprise take hold of me, I made a decision: would stay calm and spend the day the way I had planned. The ceremony continued with the pomp that Katie had always loved. The bride and groom appeared with a sparkle, as if they had stepped off the cover of a glamorous magazine. The guests made warm speeches, among which there was an atmosphere of fun and lightness. But it didn't bother me much. I focused on the food in front of me, trying not to look at the bride and groom, who were posing for endless photos surrounded by guests. My parents also stood up, moving towards the couple, not paying the slightest attention to me, as if I were an empty place. Katie shone in the spotlight, hugging her fiancé and smiling in every photo, as if there wasn't a single shadow in her world. All this time, I remained calm, although the scene playing out in front of me caused conflicting feelings. I fought with myself not to let the bitterness take over me. However, suddenly Katie came up to me. Her smile was wide, but there was something more than simple excitement in her eyes. "Sis," she began with mock amusement, "it's been so long, hasn't it? I'm so glad we're back together. Isn't that wonderful?" Her words sounded like she was playing some kind of game, and I replied with a barely noticeable sarcastic smile. "Yes, the food at the banquet is really excellent." Katie, catching my tone, replied with a mocking twinkle in her eyes. "Oh, of course, they don't serve such food in the factory where you work. You should be grateful for this opportunity." Something inside me trembled, but I didn't let those words come out. I restrained myself, even though her contemptuous hints pierced me. Katie continued. "Oh my God, did I upset you? I'm sorry, but you probably can't help but be jealous. After all, your younger sister is getting married to a doctor. It's natural, isn't it?" She said the word "I'm sorry" so lightly, as if it meant nothing, as if it was an empty sound devoid of any sincerity. I didn't let my emotions show on my face, even though her words sounded like needles digging into my skin. I was just waiting for her to say next. And then, coming closer, Katie whispered in my ear. "You know, big sister, I came up with a great idea." I felt a slight tremor at her words, but I asked with restraint, trying not to betray suspicion. "And what kind of idea is that?" Katie, clearly pleased with herself, replied with a smug smile. "You'll see. Just watch carefully." Her voice sounded like a conspirator's, and her elegant wedding dress rustled slightly as she walked away from me. Katie gathered the attention of all the guests, as if this was her main triumphant moment. Taking the microphone from the staff, she suddenly spoke loudly, with a haughty confidence that could not but shock those around her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, drawing the eyes of everyone present to her, "perhaps you do not know, but my sister is present here. Of course, she has no higher education and is not the youngest, but, if there is someone kind-hearted enough, could you take her under your wing?" Her words cut into me like knives. My face burned with humiliation, and I couldn't contain my indignation. "What are you saying, Katie?" I exclaimed, but she wasn't listening anymore. Continuing with even more confidence, she said, "Although she earns little and leads a modest life, is there anyone here who can brighten my sister's future?" The guests froze in embarrassment, their eyes darting between Katie and me, trying to figure out what was going on. Katie seemed to enjoy my confusion, her smug smile shining even brighter. At that moment, her rude behavior reached its peak. Even our usually quiet and level-headed parents suddenly intervened. "Please treat her kindly," they added, as if I were some kind of outcast in need of mercy. That was the last straw. Rage boiled up inside me from such bullying at such a solemn event. How far would they go to humiliate me? I couldn't believe it, but I knew that the moment for an answer had come. The atmosphere in the hall changed, and a murmur of dissatisfied whispers spread through the ranks of the guests. Katie, completely caught up in her demonstration, did not notice that the situation was getting out of control. She shouted cheerfully, "Wendy, look, there are so many doctors here. This is your chance." I stared at her in silence, but there was so much determination in her gaze that it finally caught her attention. "This is the end for you," I said softly but firmly. Katie was confused, her smug smile fading. "What do you mean?" she whispered, losing her confidence. I continued more calmly, but with even more firmness. "You'll soon realize how terrible your actions were." Katie tried to answer, but suddenly the groom's voice cut through the tense silence. "Wait. Why are you leaving your seats?" He turned to a group of his colleagues, who, as it turned out, had already started to get up from their seats, clearly intending to leave the hall. The groom looked confused, his face expressed confusion and confusion. These were not just guests, many of them were his colleagues at work, and among them was one of the most respected people, the director of the hospital. The groom hurried to them, begging them not to leave. "Please wait. Please let me take responsibility for Katie's words and actions. I understand that her words were inappropriate, but I will talk to her and do everything so that she corrects her behavior." However, the hospital director was adamant. His face remained stern, and there was obvious irritation in his voice. "The problem is not only in her words. You have no idea who her sister is." The groom looked completely stunned. "No," he admitted, "I met her sister for the first time today. All I've heard is that she worked in a factory after graduating from high school." The director could not hide his irritation and, turning to the groom, said firmly, "Don't make me laugh. Her sister is a respected lawyer and works as a legal advisor at our hospital." The director's words had a stunning effect. The groom froze, trying to comprehend what he had heard, realizing that he did not know the whole truth. He had no idea who I really was. At that moment, both Katie and my parents froze in utter shock. Their humiliating words and attempts to mock me now backfired on them. They were speechless, as if the whole world had suddenly turned upside down for them. I worked as a legal advisor at the hospital where Katie's fiancé was a doctor. I had seen him several times at hospital events, and therefore his face seemed familiar to me. Apparently, not only he, but also the other guests gradually began to understand who I was. Katie's comments became increasingly inappropriate, and the atmosphere of tension grew. Even among her friends, guests, and colleagues, discontent was growing, and this angered the director so much that he decided to leave the event. The groom, apparently, did not know himself how to react to this. The groom's face turned red with shame and anger as he took a determined step towards Katie. His voice cut sharply through the tense atmosphere of the hall. "Because of your carelessness, my reputation is now tarnished." Katie staggered, trying to find the right words, but her face expressed only confusion and fear, like a child caught off guard. She mumbled excuses, her voice trembling. I didn't know my sister held such a prestigious position. I didn't think." But her words only added fuel to the fire. The groom, even more indignant, raised his voice. His gaze was full of indignation. "Ignorance is not an excuse. How can you be so frivolous and disrespectful to your own sister? Your behavior is a disgrace. You've completely lost sight of what's really valuable." Katie was desperately trying to explain herself. Her voice had taken on a plaintive note, and she was almost in tears, begging, "Wait, listen, I have a good reason, However, the groom did not let her finish. His patience snapped. With cold determination, he cut her off, uttering words that left a dead silence in the hall. "The marriage is dissolved. I'm not interested in hearing your excuses. Our engagement ends here." Katie, as if struck by lightning, fell to her knees, her face turned pale, Her lips trembled. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her world crumbled right in front of her eyes. The groom, unable to restrain himself from rage, ran out of the wedding hall, followed by other guests, leaving her completely helpless. When I was about to leave after the others, I suddenly heard a desperate scream behind me. "Please help me, Wendy." Her voice, full of pleading and despair, did not arouse the slightest compassion in me. I turned to her with cold severity. "Can I help you? Why should I do this? The situation you find yourself in is the result of your own actions. You make fun of others, and then you play the victim. It's a pity, Katie." She looked at me with complete incomprehension, her eyes glistening with tears. "Why do you use such harsh words? If I had known about your success as a lawyer..." I looked at her with cold calmness and replied in a firm tone. "Why should I tell you or anyone else about my profession? You've never been interested in my life. In fact, I plan to end all relations with my family after this wedding. But now, seeing your unfortunate ending, I'm probably somewhat pleased. You must be disappointed that your engagement to the doctor has been terminated. You'd better work hard to find the next prospect." With that, I turned around and left the hall with dignity. Behind me, I could hear muffled voices full of condemnation and criticism coming from my parents and the rest of the guests. Everything was going exactly as I expected. The marriage that my parents had pinned such high hopes on no longer existed. They believed that Katie's future was secured thanks to her connection with the doctor, but now their expectations have collapsed. For the first time in a long time, I saw anger and disappointment fill their faces. Katie, humiliated in having lost everything she had, desperately tried to find support. She turned to me with a broken heart, but I remained adamant. Her repeated calls, requests, pleas, I left all this unanswered. No amount of her attempts to contact me could change what I decided, to cut off all contact with my family once and for all. A few months later, I heard that Katie had quit her job and was now unemployed, estranged from her parents, locked alone in her house. Her once carefree life was ruined, and she spent her days in a meaningless existence. As for me, my life went on as usual. I was happy with both my career and my personal life. My existence has become calm and peaceful, without unnecessary problems and stresses. Although my relationship with my family has always been difficult, I found inner harmony and found support among people who appreciated me not for my background, but for my achievements and professional successes. My life, surrounded by people who supported and respected me, was not an accidental success, but the result of many years of work and effort. There were moments when seemingly insurmountable obstacles stood in front of me, but each of them made me stronger and brought me to where I am today. Now, looking back, I see that all those difficulties and trials that I overcame were priceless. And although my relationship with my family is over, I hope to continue living life to the fullest, setting realistic goals for myself and staying calm.